Hello, I'm MeshCentral, and in this technical video, we're going to take a look at the MeshCentral server codebase. So this is going to be a very quick overview of the MeshCentral server code, and it's all built in Node.js, so it runs on Node.js. It's built basically in JavaScript. And so what I want to do in this video is take a look at basically all the file structure of the MeshCentral server, and just give you a few pointers as to what files do what folders contain what, and so on, so that if you get started with coding or changing things or adding features to MeshCentral, this video will give you your basic bearings as to what these files do. So we're going to start by opening Visual Studio. Currently, I'm still using Visual Studio 2015, and so it is with the service packs and the Node.js add-on. And so we're going to take a look at the various MeshCentral files. If you go in GitHub, you'll see basically this directory structure with a bunch of JavaScript files here, so all the .js's, plus a bunch of folders on the top here. So the JavaScript files here are basically all the big files that do all the work for MeshCentral. And then we have the agents folder and a bunch of other folders. So I want to just go through some of those. So the agent folders essentially contains the compiled version of the mesh agents, the MeshCentral router, the MeshCentral assistant, and also all the JavaScript code that we send to the agents, and all the installation scripts or things that have to do with agents installation. So that folder contains basically all of that. So the few subfolders there are for Mesh Command and Mesh Core. Now, these are the libraries that are packed into the Mesh Core. And so you'll see the meshcore.js here. So what we'll do is we'll take all the libraries in the Mesh Core folders, pack them with the meshcore.js file, and that will be sent to all the agents so that they will run that JavaScript and know how to do remote desktop, file terminal, and so on. So that's what these folders are. The underscore min means that it's the minified version. Now, if you don't have the minified versions available, then the server will automatically take the non-minified version. But if the .min here is available, and if the Mesh Core and Mesh Command .min are available, then the server will automatically use those if present. Otherwise, we have basically a big chunk here of mesh agents compiled for a whole bunch of different Linux and BSD and Mac variations. So we have a bunch of these, and essentially what you have to do is cross-compile them. Take the mesh agent source code, compile them for different operating system, different CPUs, and different libraries for those CPUs and OSs. And so that's really incredibly tricky to get all these agents compiled. And there is, you'll note, for example, that OS X has both the ARM or the Apple Silicon and the Intel version, plus the Universal, which is the merge of the Apple Silicon and the Intel version. It's merged into a universal one. So what we'll do is we'll typically install the universal on Mac, and then when there's an update later, we'll only send either the ARM or the x86, depending on which one is needed. So you have MeshCentral Assistant, MeshCentral Router. You have all the versions of the Mesh Agent for Windows, and there are unsigned and the signed version here. If anyone wants to sign a version of the Mesh Agent, they can take the unsigned version, sign it, and replace the signed version. If they want to do that. Notice that if you don't have the signed version available here, then the unsigned is automatically used by the server. So that's no problem at all. So anyway, that's the agents folder has to do with basically mesh agents. The second one here is AMT. This is the active management technology. It's an Intel technology that basically has an agent built into the platform. This are modules that basically allow MeshCentral to the MeshCentral server to talk to AMT. And so we have like the Wizman and Wizman communication layer. We have ID redirect, the setup.bin file for creating USB keys, the XML parser, and the main AMT stack here. So if you're not interested in Intel AMT, then you won't need to bother with this, but this is quite important. The debug here and bin, they don't contain anything. Docs is just documentation. It is the same documentation that's in Word, but converted into an open document format, so anybody can read it, even if you don't have Microsoft. Emails, this is various email templates that the server will pick up, change the template with, and fill it up with the right information, and then send it out using SMTP. So you'll have an email, for example, here with server name verification, hi username, this server is performing an email verification, and so on. So there is a text version and a HTML version of each email with basically special codes placed in so that the server can replace the information with the right data. Also, there's translations here. This is the same files, but they're all translated in different languages. The server will pick up the right file in the right language and to send the email. So if the user is looking at the web page in Portuguese, then the server will pick up the Portuguese email template, change the information, and send that out. So that's good. Image spare, this is just a folder I have for myself with spare images. Node modules, obviously, that's all my modules. All the other dependencies for MeshCentral, in my case here. OBG is not important. That's like an empty folder. Public is important. This is all of the HTML, all the web server content that is served to the users when they access the HTTP server. So there's things like Mesh Commander, there's favorite icons here, the robot.txt file, so that tells robots, not like Google that search the internet all the time, tells them not to record this website. Then you have a bunch of images, so all the images like little graphics that we use all over the website, and we have subfolders here with graphics too. So that's pretty cool. Now we also have the this folder contains the web-based RDP client that MeshCentral has. So if you want to make an RDP session using entirely inside your browser, then there's a project, an open source project that supports that, and that's been pulled into MeshCentral, and so that's the files for that, and so those will be served to the browser. And OVNC, this is a VNC client that is entirely browser based, and that's also been pulled into MeshCentral. There's a bunch of samples here I won't get into. Actually, these are not that; these are just junk. And then scripts. These are all the scripts, the JavaScript scripts, that are sent to the browser to support the main application. So when you click on, let's see here, I'm just going to go to my server. So when you go to your server and you load this page, all the supporting, I'm going to open here it goes, all the supporting libraries for this web page. So you'll see things like, here I'll hit Shift Reload, and you should see all the supporting libraries. Oh, there it goes, all. So all the libraries that are being loaded onto the web page, so things like so these would be images, but then you also have JavaScript files right here. And so all these JavaScript files are in this script folder right there. And so those are basically support the client-side web page. You have sounds. I don't have that much sounds, but the notification sound on the web page, that's a small MP3. And so that's there. And then styles is all the style sheets that MeshCentral uses. And so the main one is styles.css. That's the biggest one. So that's it. I do have a batch file here called translate.js, translate.bat. This is a batch file I use to run the translator system that will basically pick up the English web page and create all the web pages for different languages like Portuguese, Chinese, Korean, and so on. So that's my web page, my batch file for doing that. The translate here, this is where there is the translate.json. This is the main file that contains all the translations of MeshCentral in all the languages. So you have the English version, run it and press install or connect, and then you'll have all the other languages around it. The location where this string is located inside the MeshCentral code. And so you have that for lots and lots of different languages. So that is the translate folder. Typing, I don't have anything in here important. Really one of the biggest folders here, apart from the root folder, and this last one for the folders is the views. This is the actual web pages for the login screen, for the main web app. So for example, when you hit this page here, which is the main page most people use the most, well, this web page is actually called default.handlebars right here, handlebars. And then there's also a minified version of it, which you see instead of 1 megabyte is 600K. So when I load my web page, I can go into, actually no, I'll just say view page source, and you should see the source show up here. So this is not the minified version, but if I go and say minify equal 1, or if I go in the settings and turn on minification, then when you say view page source code, you'll see that this is minified into one single super long line. So that's why it's very small. So for debugging purposes, I personally don't turn on minification, but in production, you can turn on minification and basically all your web pages that you're sending are much smaller. So default here, we have also the default mobile. This is the mobile website. I can do mobile equal 1. This is my own debug option here to force the mobile website. And so you see the mobile website pop up. This is this one right there. Then there's error pages, like if you get a 404 error, and actually I can demonstrate this. I'll just basically type anything here. So this page with the 404 error, it's right there. There's a mobile version, and there's two different styles. Some of things like the login screen have two different styles, the messaging screen, the player, terms of use, and so on and so forth. So all these are the web pages. And of course, these are all English. Then if you go in the translation folder, all these pages are also translated in different languages. And the thing that's amazing here is that there's no runtime translation of the web pages. So when you show up and you want the Korean web page, then the server will just grab the Korean version of, for example, the mass messenger in this case, and it will just grab that and send that. It doesn't need to do any processing. So it's very, very fast. Obviously, it takes more disk space to keep all these files, these translated files, but it saves on processing. Okay, so last thing I want to do here is kind of cover the root folder. So now that we've covered these subfolders, just the root folders, and just kind of go through these files and roughly give you an idea what they are. So everything that starts with AMT, these are various Intel Active Management Technology files. There's a provisioning server for, this is actually for what's called bare metal provisioning. There's the manager here. This is a big one. This is the the code that basically looks at all the AMT devices that the server has access to and makes sure that that all these devices are configured correctly, they're maintained correctly, everything works fine. So this AMT manager is like pretty big because it, and you can see it with the code size here at 154K, because it just kind of has a lot of things to do. The AMT scanner, this will scan the local network to find AMT devices, and so on and so forth. I won't go into that too much. App Relay, this is a different version of the Mesh Relay. So let's talk about this. So this file here, the Mesh Relay, allows the mesh agent and the browser to talk to each other. So the server will say, if somebody clicks and says, I want a remote desktop connection, then the server will set up a connection between that agent and the browser, and it's done through the Mesh Relay. If you are connecting to a local machine, so local in that it's local on the same network as the server, like you're in LAN mode, then the App Relay will be used instead of the Mesh Relay. So the App Relay is between the browser and a machine on the same network as the server, where Mesh Relay is between the browser and one of the agents. So that's the difference between those two. Cert operations, that's a file that creates all the MeshCentral certificates, and it has a whole bunch of operations for doing verification, creation, and management of certificates. Obviously, certificates are a big part of MeshCentral, for security purposes. So there's lots of different operations we need to do on certificates, and there's a single file to do all that. The common.js file, this is just a bunch of utility functions that I use throughout, so fairly easy. The db.js, this is a database file. This basically all the database stuff is handled here. And this file will handle 4 types of databases, and depending on the database you choose, there'll be a different implementation of how to interact with that database. But basically the rest of MeshCentral, when it wants to do a database operation, it will use the db.js file here to take care of that. exe handler, this is a very fun JavaScript. It basically allows MeshCentral to modify an executable in Windows. So when you download an agent, the agent has all your information about your server and the device group that that agent is supposed to connect to. What we do is we take the executable of the agent, modify it to add that information, and then that's what we send that the browser downloads. And so in the case of MeshCentral Assistant or the Mesh Agent, we have to modify these EXEs, and we have to do it even if the server is running on Linux. We need to be able to serve a Windows agent that is modified without that information in it. And so the exe handler here does that. Firebase is the push notification for Android. It allows you to grab your Android phone and receive a notification on it. Very cool. The Interceptor, this is actually used for Intel AMT especially, and it allows the browser to talk to an AMT device, and without knowing what the credentials of the AMT device is, what the Interceptor does is, as the calls are being made to AMT, the Interceptor will add the credentials to that HTTP stream. A little complicated, but it's important to do that for security purposes. You don't want to ever give the browser or the user that's using the browser, you don't want to give it any username or passwords or something for some resource. What you want to do is have the server keep that and control that. So that's what Interceptor does. Let's Encrypt, that allows you to get a Let's Encrypt certificate and automatically renew it. If you are not familiar with this, you can run the server. Let's see, I'm going to run the server here, and then you can go in the My Server console, type LE for Let's Encrypt. And right now my server doesn't have Let's Encrypt here, but if you did have Let's Encrypt, it would show you the current status. You can type also LE events and so on. And basically set up to automatically get and renew Let's Encrypt certificate. That's what that does. MCREC, that's the MeshCentral recording file. It allows you to record sessions for later playback. Mesh Accelerator, this is a way to boost the speed of MeshCentral. You guys may know, if you're familiar with Node.js, that Node.js is a single-threaded, event-based, system. Well, if you're going to do CPU-intensive tasks like doing certificate verification, certificate creation, things like that, what you want to do is, if you have multiple processors, you want to offload that to another processor. So Mesh Accelerator is basically a system where there's some tasks that can be offloaded to another processor, and once it's done, the accelerator will come back with the answer and pass it back to the main Node.js process for execution, to complete. Mesh agent, this is one of the most important files. Of course, MeshCentral.js is like probably the root. It's the root file, so it's the most important one. But next to that, we have Mesh agent and also Mesh user. These are the three big ones. So I would say MeshCentral, Mesh agent, and Mesh users are the three big files. The MeshCentral is the root one. This is the one you run when you launch MeshCentral. It gets everything started. It will start the HTTP server. It will start any services, SMS things you have to do, SMTP connections, and so on. So that's the file that will start it all. And then it will listen on port 443 for agents to connect. And every time an agent connects, it will start an instance of the mesh agent file. So that's each meshagent.js represents one agent connected to the server. And so this will handle one connection to an agent. It will try to, it will do the agent update. It will handle all the traffic to it from the agents, things like remote desktop, gathering data, and so on and so forth. So that's what the meshagent.js does. Mesh user here does the same thing, but for the browser. So if you're a browser and you connect to the MeshCentral server, so for example, your browser here and you're connected and you're seeing this screen, what you don't know is that the server has an instance of MeshCentral user, this file, running to represent you on the server side. So as soon as you close that browser, the meshuser.js here will disappear. And as users log in, you'll have one meshuser.js for each user that is connected. So, mesh agent, one for each agent, mesh user, one for each user that logs in. Okay, then you have, of course, MeshCentral. Mesh control, this is a tool. It's completely separate. It's actually not used by MeshCentral, but you can run this node mesh control, and it will allow you to do command line instructions to MeshCentral. So it's like if you want to create an account using command line, you want to delete a device or change device policies or edit the icon of the device or so on, and you want to do it from a command line, mesh control is the way you would do it. The desktop multiplexer, this allows you to connect to a device and see the remote display, but have multiple users watch that display at the same time, while the agent only has one display to send to the server, and it's basically the server splits it. I have another video on that. Mesh device file, I forget what that is. I'll have to look at it later. Mesh mail, this is the SMTP server, allows MeshCentral to interact with an SMTP server and send emails. It will take care of internalization. You basically have a few commands in there to say, I want to send this email template with this data to this email address, and this will take care of it. It will queue it up and send it to the SMTP server. Mesh relay, I've talked about this. Mesh scanner, well, this is for if you're in LAN mode or hybrid mode. This will basically find mesh agents that are trying to multicast to the server and find the server. It will answer and have the mesh agent connect. So if you're in WAN mode, this is not used. SMS, this allows you to connect to Twilio or Plivo, which are the two SMS providers that MeshCentral supports, and send notification, two-factor checks and stuff like that. MPS server, this is for Intel Active Management Technology. This allows another server that's used, that usually binds on port 4433, and it receives connections from Intel Active Management Technology if Intel Management Technology is configured to connect to the cloud. So that's basically the server for that. It also does a bunch of other things. MQTT Broker, this is a feature in MeshCentral that supports MQTT. So you can have an MQTT device agent connect to and do some stuff. So I haven't worked too much on this, but there is a YouTube video on that feature if you're interested in that. Multi-server, super crazy file. It allows multiple MeshCentral servers to run as a single server. So basically, if you have 5 MeshCentral servers with a single database in the back, this file will take care of the communication between the servers, and it will basically make it so that if a server gets a new connection or there's an event happens, it will send that event to the other servers so that they can basically respond to the event and act like a single server. So that's what that is. Pass, this is the password hashing for all the passwords. Plugin handler, there is a plugin system for MeshCentral, and so I don't maintain that very much, but it is there. The redirection server, this is the piece of code waiting on port 80 for HTTP connections. And so there's not much there, but if you make an HTTP connection to MeshCentral, that connection has to be redirected to HTTPS on port 443. And so that's what this server, redirection server does. In addition, it does a couple of other things, like if you have Let's Encrypt, then Let's Encrypt will make queries on port 80 of your server to verify that your domain name is really owned by you and you control that domain name. And so the redirection server will do also Let's Encrypt work and a couple of other things. The Swarm server, this is not used very much. If you had MeshCentral version 1 a long time ago, this was code to basically have MeshCentral 2 update MeshCentral v1 agents over to version 2. I don't use that very much. UA parser, I don't actually remember what this does. WebAuth, this is the FIDO two-factor authentication USB keys. If you have, I happen to have one right here. Let's see if I don't drop it. So this is like these, $20 authentication keys. You put them in your keyboard, you tap the button, and it allows you to authenticate yourself. And so that file here allows MeshCentral to do two-factor authentication with those FIDO keys. And then the last two files, and we're done. First one is the web server. This is the file that listens on port 443 of the HTTPS, and it will take any HTTP requests from that port and respond. So it will serve the login page. It will authenticate the user. It will serve the main web application. It will also receive connections from Mesh Agent and a whole bunch of queries and requests from everything that's on 443, which is a lot of MeshCentral is on port 443. And so this will handle all the requests here. And then last one, Windows service. This is the file that takes care of hooking up MeshCentral as a Windows service so you can run it in background. On Linux, it's simpler, but on Windows, it's a little more complicated, so there's a separate file to do that. Now, if you just sort by size, you obviously this is the Visual Studio file, so that doesn't count. But if you sort by size, you can see roughly what files are the most important. The web server, Mesh User, MeshCentral, the database, Mesh Control, AMT Manager, Mesh Agent, and the MPS server, which is the server for receiving Intel AMT connections. So these are the big files that have the most work from MeshCentral in these files. So hopefully that was a good overview of the entire code base of MeshCentral. Obviously, I just talked about the file. I haven't dug into any of the the specific code, but in upcoming videos, we'll take a look and dig into some of the code more closely. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Have a great day.